The great hall of the Galactic Council buzzed with voices from dozens of different species. Ambassador Lee Dae-ho stood at the human podium and watched the alien representatives argue about his people as if they were not even there. The tall, blue Veltari delegate waved his forearms while speaking about human military ships. The crystal-like Mordun representative made strange singing sounds that meant disapproval. Even the small, furry Cathani were chittering angrily about human trade practices. Lee Dae-ho had served as Earth's voice in this chamber for 12 years. He had seen many debates, but never one quite like this. Today the Council was voting on Resolution 847 Delta, which would remove all human voting rights in galactic affairs. The reason given was simple and familiar. Humans were too aggressive and too dangerous to have a say in peaceful galactic civilization. Admiral Kim So-ra sat in the human section behind Lee Dae-ho. Her dark uniform bore the marks of 30 years of service protecting trade routes and colony worlds. She had fought pirates in the Outer Rim and rescued stranded ships in the Dead Zone. Her record was clean and her service exemplary. Yet the alien delegates spoke of her kind as if they were barely controlled savages. Chief Diplomat Park Jin-woo adjusted his glasses and reviewed his notes one final time. He had prepared careful arguments about human contributions to galactic society. The numbers were impressive. Humans operated 60% of the dangerous cargo routes, provided 40% of the Council's military forces, and had established early warning stations in 37 hostile systems. But looking at the faces in the chamber, he knew his words would fall on deaf ears. The Veltari delegate was speaking now about human expansion into the neutral zones. His translator device turned his hissing words into cold galactic standard. The humans establish military outposts where they claim to build research stations, he said, while his eye stalks swiveled toward the human section. They arm their merchant vessels beyond all reasonable need. They train their children in combat. From an early age, these are not the actions of a peaceful species. Choi Min-soo sat in the observer gallery and felt his age in every bone. At 93, he had lived through humanity's first contact with galactic civilization. He remembered the hope in human eyes when they learned they were not alone in the universe. He remembered the excitement when humanity was invited to join the great community of spacefaring species. Now he watched that dream die in a chamber full of aliens who feared what they did not understand. The Morden delegate's crystalline body flashed with patterns of light that meant formal accusation. The translator struggled with the harmonic language but managed to convey the meaning. Humans show concerning psychological profiles, the translation said in its flat mechanical voice. They form strong emotional bonds with their military units. They display protective instincts toward weaker species that border on the irrational. They refuse to abandon positions even when retreat would be strategically sound. These traits indicate dangerous unpredictability. Lee Dae-ho almost smiled at that. Yes, humans were protective. Yes, they formed bonds with their comrades. Yes, they stood their ground when others might run. These were the very qualities that had made human peacekeepers so effective in the galaxy's trouble spots. Human Marines held the line when alien forces retreated. Human rescue teams went into situations that other species declared too dangerous. Human traders carried supplies to worlds that others considered too risky to visit. The debate continued for hours. Speaker after speaker rose to express their concerns about human nature. The Zafani delegate worried about human breeding rates and population growth. The Cormel representative complained about human mining techniques that were too thorough and efficient. Even the usually neutral Silari raised questions about human research into defensive technologies. Dr. Yoon Ha-young monitored the proceedings from the Human Embassy's communications center. Her job was to relay the day's events back to Earth and the human colonies. She had done this work for 8 years and had seen the gradual shift in galactic opinion. At first, humans had been welcomed as useful additions to the galactic community. Their willingness to take dangerous jobs had been appreciated, Their military effectiveness had been valued. But as the years passed, appreciation had turned to suspicion, and suspicion had grown into fear. The vote came as the chamber's artificial sun began to dim for the evening cycle. One by one, the species called their positions. The Veltari voted yes to strip human rights. The Morduns sang their agreement. The Kethani chittered their approval. Even species that had been helped by human actions voted to remove human influence from galactic affairs. When the final tally appeared on the great display, the numbers were stark. 217 species voted to remove human voting rights. Only 34 voted against the measure. 19 abstained. The resolution passed by an overwhelming margin. Speaker Zolthara's voice echoed through the chamber as he announced the results. His species was ancient and respected, with pale green skin and wise golden eyes. He had always treated humans fairly in past debates. But today, his voice carried the weight of galactic judgment. Resolution 847 Delta is hereby enacted, he declared. Effective immediately, human representation in this body is reduced to observer status only. Humans may speak when recognized, but may not vote on any matters affecting galactic policy. Lee. Deho stood slowly and gathered his papers. The chamber fell silent as all eyes turned to the human delegation. Many species expected anger, protests, or demands for reconsideration. Humans had a reputation for emotional responses after all. Instead, Lee Deho simply bowed once to Speaker Zolthara. The human delegation acknowledges the Council's decision, he said in perfect galactic standard. His voice was calm and dignified. We thank the Council for the years of cooperation and wish all member species prosperity and peace. Admiral Kim, Sora rose and nodded to the military attachés from other species. Chief Diplomat Park Jin-woo closed his briefcase and stood as well. The entire human delegation moved toward the exits with quiet dignity. No shouting, no threats, no dramatic speeches about injustice. They simply left. Choi Min-soo made his way down from the observer gallery. As the oldest human in the building, many expected him to say something about this historic moment. Instead, he just smiled sadly and followed the others toward the door. Dr. Yoon Ha-young received the first coded message from Earth just 6 hours after the vote. The message was brief and used old diplomatic language, but its meaning was clear. Operation Homecoming was authorized and would begin immediately. Over the next 3 days, something unprecedented happened across the galaxy. Every human embassy, trade post, research station, and military base began shutting down. Human diplomats closed their offices and destroyed their classified files. Human traders recalled their ships from routes throughout the galaxy. Human researchers packed their equipment and encrypted their data. The process was orderly and professional. Humans honored their existing contracts and completed their current missions. They returned borrowed equipment and settled all outstanding debts. They even left behind gifts and personal messages for alien friends and colleagues. But they also removed every trace of human technology, knowledge, and presence from Council space. Captain Ryu Sun-hee commanded one of the largest cargo fleets in the galaxy. Her ships carried medical supplies to plague worlds and rare metals to industrial centers. When the recall order came, she organized the largest logistics operation in galactic history. Hundreds of human vessels began converging on predetermined rally points. Within a week, nearly 3,000 human ships had withdrawn from Council space. The aliens watched in growing confusion as humanity simply disappeared. There were no angry ultimatums or threats of retaliation. Humans did not cut off trade relationships suddenly or abandon their responsibilities carelessly. They just quietly, efficiently, and completely removed themselves from galactic civilization. General Song Woo-jin supervised the withdrawal of human military forces from dozens of Council installations. His troops handed over their positions to alien replacements and wished them well. They shared intelligence about local threats and provided detailed briefings about ongoing operations. Then they boarded their ships and departed for human space. The galaxy had voted to exclude humanity from galactic affairs. Humanity had accepted that decision with grace and dignity. Now the aliens would discover what they had truly chosen when they decided they no longer needed their human neighbors. 6 months had passed since the humans disappeared from galactic space, and Speaker Zolthara felt pleased with how smoothly things were going. The council chambers seemed more peaceful without human delegates asking difficult questions about military spending and border security. The morning reports showed no major conflicts anywhere in council territory. Even the usual trade disputes between species seemed to be resolving themselves through proper diplomatic channels. The first sign of trouble came from the shipping records that administrative observer Kang Jae-min had left behind in the council archives. The human clerk had been obsessively thorough in his documentation. Every human contribution to galactic society had been carefully recorded and filed. Now that the humans were gone, these records painted a disturbing picture of growing gaps in essential services. Captain Ryu Sun-hee had operated the primary shipping route between the industrial worlds of the inner spiral and the mining colonies of the outer rim. Her fleet of cargo vessels had been specially modified to carry radioactive materials and unstable chemicals that other species considered too dangerous to transport. Without her ships, these hazardous but necessary materials were piling up at their source points while factory worlds began to experience shortages. The Veltari delegate who had spoken so strongly against human militarism now found himself dealing with a crisis on his homeworld. The mining operations on Veltar Prime had always relied on human contractors to extract rare elements from the planet's unstable core. The work was dangerous and required split-second decisions that most species found too stressful. Humans had not only been willing to do this work, but had actually seemed to enjoy the challenge. Lim Tai-jun's mining company had operated 17 deep-core extraction facilities across 8 different star systems. His teams had developed techniques for working in environments that would kill most other species within minutes. When the humans withdrew, they had shut down these operations and taken their specialized equipment with them. Now the affected worlds were facing shortages of essential materials needed for everything from starship construction to medical equipment. The Council's military forces were experiencing even more serious problems. General Song Woo-jin had commanded the peacekeeping forces in the wild sectors, where pirates and raiders operated beyond the reach of most galactic law. Human troops had made up nearly 30% of these forces and had always volunteered for the most dangerous assignments. They had been the ones willing to board hostile vessels, clear out pirate strongholds, and pursue criminals into asteroid fields and nebula clouds. Without human forces, the remaining peacekeepers found themselves overwhelmed. The Morden troops were excellent at defensive operations, but struggled with the aggressive tactics needed to root out criminal organizations. The Cathani were brave fighters, but their small size made them vulnerable in ship-to-ship combat. The Zafani had advanced technology, but were too cautious to take the risks that effective law enforcement required. Commander Yang Su-bin had maintained a network of early warning stations along the galactic rim. These installations monitored space beyond the known star systems and watched for signs of external threats. Her teams had operated in isolation for months at a time, enduring conditions that would drive most species to mental breakdown. The work was boring, dangerous, and largely thankless, which made it perfect for humans who seemed to thrive on impossible assignments. When the humans departed, these monitoring stations went dark one by one. The automated systems continued to function for a while, but without human technicians to maintain and repair them, they gradually failed. The galaxy's eyes and ears along its outer borders were going blind and deaf. Dr. Seo Young-mi's research consortium had been working on breakthrough technologies that promised to revolutionize galactic communication and travel. Her teams had developed new approaches to quantum entanglement communication that could transmit messages across vast distances instantly. They had also been experimenting with improvements to faster-than-light drive systems that could reduce travel times between star systems by significant amounts. The alien scientists who had worked with Dr. Co's teams tried to continue the research after the humans left, but they quickly discovered that human innovation came from more than just knowledge and equipment. Humans had an intuitive understanding of chaotic systems and unpredictable variables that other species found difficult to replicate. Without human insights, the research projects stalled and eventually stopped making progress. Trade Administrator Nam Ho-seok had managed supply chains that connected hundreds of worlds across 17 different sectors. His organization had specialized in routes through dangerous space that other shipping companies avoided. Human traders were willing to navigate through pirate-infested systems, unstable star clusters, and regions of space that were considered too hazardous for normal commercial traffic. The removal of human shipping capacity created immediate problems throughout the galaxy. Worlds that had depended on regular deliveries of food, medicine, and manufactured goods found themselves facing shortages. The remaining alien shipping companies tried to fill the gap, but they were unwilling or unable to take the risks that human traders had accepted as routine business. Captain Ban Min-ho had commanded patrol routes along the borders between Council space and the lawless regions beyond. His ships had intercepted smugglers, pursued escaped criminals, and provided escort services for merchant vessels traveling through dangerous areas. Human patrol craft were fast, well-armed, and operated by crews who were not afraid to engage hostile forces when necessary. Without human patrols, criminal activity began to increase dramatically. Smuggling operations that had been disrupted for years suddenly found clear paths through former human patrol zones. Pirates who had been forced to operate in remote areas began moving closer to major trade routes. Even terrorist organizations that had been scattered and ineffective started to reorganize and plan new attacks. The Council's emergency sessions became more frequent as reports of problems poured in from across the galaxy. Speaker Zolthara found himself dealing with crises that had never existed when humans were part of galactic civilization. The very peace and stability that had allowed the Council to consider humans unnecessary was beginning to crumble without human protection. Engineer Oh Da-yun's technical teams had maintained the quantum resonance systems that powered the great Morden crystal cities. These ancient structures required constant adjustments and modifications to keep their energy systems stable. The work demanded a combination of technical knowledge and intuitive understanding that few species possessed. Humans had proven uniquely capable of understanding the chaotic harmonics involved in crystal technology. As the quantum resonance systems began to fail without human maintenance, the Morden cities started to dim. The beautiful light patterns that had illuminated their crystal towers for thousands of years flickered and went dark. The Mordun delegate, who had voted to remove human rights, now faced the possibility that his species' greatest achievements might crumble without human expertise. The first major disaster struck in the 8th month after human withdrawal. The Veltari homeworld suffered its first successful invasion in over 3 centuries when a coalition of pirate fleets overwhelmed the planet's defenses. The attack succeeded because the early warning systems that should have detected the approaching fleet were no longer operational. The patrol ships that should have intercepted the pirates were not in position. The defensive installations that should have protected the planet had not been properly maintained. Commander An Kyung-soo's defensive grid had protected Veltar Prime for 15 years. Her human engineering teams had constantly upgraded and improved the system, adapting it to counter new threats as they emerged. When the humans left, they had transferred control to Veltari technicians who understood the basic operations, but lacked the deep knowledge needed for ongoing development. The pirate attack revealed just how dependent the galaxy had become on human expertise. The Veltari Defense Force fought bravely, but their tactics were predictable and their responses slow. The pirates had studied galactic military doctrine and knew exactly how non-human forces would react to different situations. What they had not prepared for was the chaotic, unpredictable style of warfare that humans had perfected. As news of the Veltari invasion spread throughout the galaxy, other species began to realize the true scope of their mistake. The humans had not been aggressively expanding their influence for conquest or domination. They had been building a defensive network to protect galactic civilization from threats that other species had not even recognized. The monitoring stations along the galactic rim had been detecting signs of movement in the void beyond known space. Strange energy signatures and massive objects had been observed at the very edge of sensor range. Captain Ko Min-jung's intelligence teams had been tracking these anomalies and developing response plans for potential external threats. When the human monitoring network went dark, the galaxy lost its ability to see what was approaching from the empty space between star systems. 3 years had passed since humanity vanished from galactic space, and the problems were no longer small inconveniences that could be ignored. Trade Administrator Nam Ho-seok's absence had created supply chain breakdowns that reached into every corner of Council territory. 17 sectors were experiencing critical shortages of basic necessities because the shipping routes through dangerous space lay abandoned. The Kethani colonies in the Spiral Arm were running out of medical supplies. Their small, furry bodies were vulnerable to a dozen different diseases that required constant treatment with medicines manufactured in the core worlds. Before the human withdrawal, Captain Ryu Sun-hee's cargo fleets had made regular runs through the Pirate Nebula to deliver these essential drugs. The route was considered too dangerous for most alien shipping companies because raiders used the nebula's sensor-blocking properties to ambush passing vessels. Without human protection and willingness to take risks, the Kethani were slowly dying. Their government had tried to hire alien shipping companies to make the dangerous run, but the costs were enormous and the success rate was less than 50%. Most companies simply refused the contracts entirely. The Kethani delegate who had voted to remove human rights now watched his own people suffer because of that decision. The situation was even worse in the manufacturing centers of the inner worlds. Engineer Oh Da-yoon's quantum resonance systems had provided clean, unlimited energy to massive factory complexes that produced everything from starship components to household goods. These systems required constant fine-tuning by technicians who could understand the chaotic harmonics involved in crystal energy manipulation. The Mordun had tried to train their own people to maintain the systems, but their logical crystalline minds could not grasp the intuitive leaps that human engineers made routinely. One by one, the great manufacturing centers began to shut down as their power systems failed. The beautiful crystal cities that had gleamed with steady light for millennia now flickered uncertainly as their energy sources became unstable. Crime had exploded throughout the galaxy in ways that nobody had predicted. Captain Ban Min-ho's patrol routes had been strategically placed to intercept criminal traffic before it could reach major population centers. His human crews had been trained to think like pirates and smugglers, allowing them to predict criminal behavior and position their forces accordingly. The alien patrol forces that replaced the humans used logical tactical approaches that worked well in simulations but failed completely against real criminals. Pirates had adapted quickly to alien patrol patterns and could now move their operations with near impunity. What had once been small-scale smuggling rings had grown into powerful criminal organizations that controlled entire star systems. Thus, Zephani homeworld faced its first major terrorist attack in over 2 centuries when a criminal syndicate seized control of the planet's orbital stations. The attack succeeded because the early warning network that should have detected the approaching threat was no longer operational. Commander Yang Su-bin's monitoring posts along the galactic rim had been the first line of defense against external threats, but they had also watched for internal movements that could threaten planetary security. General Song Woo-jin's peacekeeping forces had maintained detailed intelligence networks that tracked criminal organizations across multiple star systems. When the humans withdrew, they took this intelligence with them and destroyed their databases to prevent the information from falling into the wrong hands. The remaining alien security forces found themselves fighting an enemy they could not predict or understand. The terrorist attack on the Zephani homeworld revealed just how sophisticated the criminal organizations had become. They used tactics that seemed chaotic and unpredictable to alien security forces, but which followed patterns that human military analysts would have recognized immediately. The attackers struck multiple targets simultaneously, used misdirection and false flag operations, and adapted their plans in real time as circumstances changed. Dr. Seo Young-mi's research into quantum communication systems had been on the verge of a breakthrough that would have allowed instant communication across galactic distances. Her teams had been working on solving the final technical problems when the human withdrawal began. The alien scientists who tried to continue the work found themselves unable to make progress without human insights into chaotic system behavior. The loss of improved communication technology had serious consequences for galactic coordination. Military forces could not respond quickly to emerging threats because they could not share information effectively across vast distances. Trade organizations struggled to manage complex supply chains without real-time data about market conditions and shipping schedules. Even diplomatic relations suffered because negotiations between distant worlds required weeks or months instead of minutes. The greatest crisis emerged along the galactic frontier, where Captain Ko Min-jung's defensive installations had monitored the void beyond known space. These early warning stations had been detecting strange energy signatures for years, but their reports had been dismissed by Council analysts as equipment malfunctions or natural phenomena. The humans had taken these readings seriously and had been preparing defensive measures against whatever was approaching from the darkness between galaxies. When the human monitoring network went offline, the galaxy lost its ability to see beyond its own borders. Long-range sensors that had been calibrated and maintained by human technicians gradually lost accuracy and reliability. The specialized deep space observation posts that required humans to operate in extreme isolation were abandoned one by one. The first confirmed sighting of the external threat came from a civilian research vessel that was conducting stellar surveys near the galactic edge. Dr. Park Young-ho's crew detected massive objects moving through the void at impossible speeds. The objects were clearly artificial but did not match any known technology in the galactic database. They seemed to be heading directly toward populated space. Dr. Park's ship tried to get closer for detailed scans, but the approaching objects detected the research vessel and responded with some kind of energy weapon that disabled all of the ship's electronic systems. The crew barely escaped in their emergency pods before their ship was completely consumed by a force that seemed to eat technology itself. The report from Dr. Park's expedition created panic in the council chambers. Speaker Zolthara convened emergency sessions to discuss the approaching threat, but the assembled delegates had no idea how to respond. The defensive strategies and weapons systems that might have been effective against such an enemy had been developed by human researchers who were no longer available for consultation. Dr. Shinbora's xenobiology research would have provided crucial intelligence about the nature of the approaching threat. Her laboratories had studied silicon-based life forms that could consume and process metal and electronics. She had developed theories about how such creatures might evolve and what weaknesses they might possess. Her research notes had been encrypted and taken when the humans departed, leaving the galaxy defenseless against an enemy they did not understand. The attacking force consisted of entities that the surviving witnesses called devourers. They were silicon-based organisms that could break down any form of technology and incorporate its materials into their own structures. They traveled through space in massive ships that grew larger with each world they consumed. Their approach to warfare was unlike anything in galactic military doctrine. The Devourers did not seek to conquer territory or subjugate populations. They simply consumed everything technological they encountered and left behind dead worlds, stripped of all metal and electronic devices. They moved from system to system like a plague, growing stronger with each victory as they incorporated new technologies into their biological matrices. The first worlds to fall were the isolated frontier colonies that had depended on human protection. These settlements had been established in dangerous regions of space, specifically because humans were willing to defend them against conventional threats. Without human military support, they were completely helpless against an enemy that could not be negotiated with or reasoned with. The speed of the Devourer advance caught everyone by surprise. Within 6 months of their first confirmed appearance, they had consumed 17 star systems and were moving deeper into populated space. The Council's military forces tried to stop them, but discovered that conventional weapons were completely ineffective against creatures that could absorb and redirect energy attacks. Admiral No Sung-min had prepared detailed defensive plans for exactly this type of scenario during his final months of service before the human withdrawal. His intelligence teams had analyzed the threat patterns and developed strategies that might have been effective against silicon-based consumers. These plans had been submitted to the Council's military command, but had been dismissed as unnecessary preparation for threats that would never materialize. Now those same military commanders desperately searched through their archives trying to find copies of Admiral No's reports. But the humans had been thorough in their departure and had removed all classified materials when they left. 5 years had passed since humanity's silent departure from galactic space, and the Devourer invasion had reached the core systems of Council territory. What had begun as isolated attacks on frontier worlds had become a systematic consumption of galactic civilization itself. The silicon-based entities moved through space like a technological plague, leaving behind dead worlds stripped of everything metal and electronic. General An Kyung-soo's defensive installations might have slowed the invasion if they had still been operational. His network of early warning stations and automated defense platforms had been designed specifically to counter threats approaching from beyond the galactic rim. The installations used overlapping fields of fire and coordinated response patterns. That could have given the galaxy precious time to organize a proper defense. But those defensive positions had been abandoned when the humans withdrew. The alien technicians who tried to operate them discovered that the systems required constant human oversight to function properly. The defensive installations used adaptive algorithms that learned from each encounter and modified their responses accordingly. This type of flexible thinking was something that human minds understood intuitively, but which other species found difficult to replicate. The Devourer fleets advanced through the gaps in galactic defenses, like water flowing through broken dikes. Each consumed world provided them with new technologies and materials that made them stronger for the next attack. They adapted their tactics constantly, incorporating lessons learned from each battle into their biological matrices. The Council's remaining military forces tried desperately to find some way to stop the invasion. Fleet Admiral Torvak of the Zephani led a massive assault against a Devourer concentration in the Beta sector, using every advanced weapon and tactical innovation that galactic science could provide. The battle was a complete disaster. The Devourers absorbed the energy from the alien weapons and used it to power their own systems. They analyzed the tactical patterns of the galactic fleets and countered every strategy with perfect efficiency. What the alien commanders did not understand was that the Devourers had evolved to fight against logical, predictable opponents. Their silicon-based minds could process vast amounts of tactical data and respond to any organized attack pattern. But they had never encountered the chaotic, unpredictable warfare style that humans had developed over millennia of conflict. Dr. Shinbo-ra's research into silicon-based life forms would have provided the key to defeating the Devourers. Her laboratories had studied creatures that consumed technology and had identified their fundamental weakness. Silicon-based organisms that fed on organized matter could be disrupted by introducing chaotic elements into their feeding processes. The more unpredictable the input, the more difficult it became for them to process and absorb. Human military doctrine had always emphasized adaptability and improvisation over rigid tactical formations. Human commanders were trained to think creatively and to modify their plans constantly as battlefield conditions changed. This approach had often frustrated alien allies who preferred orderly, logical strategies, but it would have been devastatingly effective against an enemy that relied on pattern recognition to survive. Admiral No Sung-min's final intelligence. Reports had contained detailed analyses of the approaching threat and specific recommendations for countering silicon-based consumers. His teams had developed weapons that fired chaotic energy bursts, designed to disrupt the feeding processes of technological organisms. They had created tactics that used random movement patterns and unpredictable attack sequences to confuse enemies that relied on logical analysis. These weapons and tactics had been dismissed by the Council's military leadership as unnecessarily complex and difficult to implement. Alien commanders preferred clean, orderly battle plans that could be executed with mathematical precision. They could not understand why humans would deliberately introduce chaos into their own military operations. Now the galaxy was paying the price for that lack of understanding. The Devourer fleets swept through system after system, consuming everything in their path. The beautiful crystal cities of the Mordun were reduced to empty husks. The industrial complexes of the inner worlds became silent graveyards. Even the mighty fortress worlds of the Veltari fell within days of the first Devourer landing. Commander Yang Subin's monitoring network would have detected the Devourer approach months before they reached populated space. Her early warning stations had been positioned at strategic points along the galactic rim where they could observe movement in the void between star systems. The stations used quantum sensors that could detect the unique energy signatures produced by silicon-based organisms at vast distances. The advance warning would have allowed the galaxy to prepare proper defenses and evacuate vulnerable populations before the attack began. Instead, the Devourers achieved complete tactical surprise and struck at the heart of galactic civilization before anyone realized the scope of the threat. Dr. Co. Young-mi's quantum communication research could have provided the instant coordination needed to mount an effective defense against a rapidly moving enemy. Her breakthrough technologies would have allowed military commanders to share tactical information across galactic distances in real time. Fleets in different star systems could have worked together as a unified force instead of fighting isolated battles against superior numbers. Without improved communication systems, the Council's military response was fragmented and ineffective. By the time news of an attack reached neighboring systems, the Devourers had already moved on to their next target. Defense fleets arrived at battle sites to find empty space where thriving worlds had existed just days before. The refugee crisis overwhelmed every remaining Council facility. Billions of survivors fled from consumed worlds with nothing but the clothes on their backs. The emergency shelters and supply distribution networks that might have helped them had been managed by human organizations that no longer existed. Trade Administrator Nam Ho-seok's logistics networks could have coordinated relief efforts across multiple star systems, but those systems had been dismantled when the humans departed. Captain Ban Min-ho's patrol forces would have been crucial for protecting refugee fleets from pirates and raiders who saw the chaos as an opportunity for profit. Instead, the fleeing populations found themselves attacked by criminals as well as devourers. The same lawless elements that had grown powerful after human withdrawal now preyed on desperate refugees who had lost everything. The Cathani evacuation fleet was attacked by pirates just 3 days after fleeing their homeworld. The small furry beings had managed to escape ahead of the Devourer advance, but their ships were loaded with civilian families who could not defend themselves. Without human escort vessels to protect them, they became easy targets for raiders who stole their supplies and sold them into slavery. Engineering teams led by O Da-un could have maintained the critical infrastructure needed to support massive refugee populations. Her quantum resonance systems could have provided clean energy for temporary settlements, while her technical expertise could have kept essential systems operational under extreme stress. Instead, refugee camps struggled with power failures, water shortages, and communication breakdowns that made their suffering even worse. The psychological impact of the invasion was as devastating as the physical destruction. Species that had lived in peace for centuries found themselves facing an enemy that could not be reasoned with or negotiated with. The Devourers showed no interest in conquest or subjugation. They simply consumed everything technological and moved on to the next target, like a force of nature. This was exactly the type of existential threat that human strategists had been preparing for throughout their time in galactic civilization. While other species focused on trade disputes and territorial negotiations, humans had studied warfare against non-negotiable enemies. They had developed contingency plans for fighting opponents who could not be deterred or defeated through conventional diplomacy. General Song Woo-jin's peacekeeping forces had trained for exactly this scenario. Human military doctrine included specific procedures for fighting technological consumers and guidelines for protecting civilian populations during chaotic withdrawals. These procedures had been shared with alien military leaders who had filed them away as interesting theoretical exercises that would never be needed. Now those same military leaders desperately tried to remember the details of human training programs they had dismissed as unnecessarily paranoid. But the institutional knowledge that had taken humanity centuries to develop could not be recovered from incomplete notes and half-remembered briefings. The city of New Geneva on the Zephani homeworld had been home to the galaxy's largest military academy, where human instructors taught advanced tactical theory to officers from dozens of different species. The Academy's curriculum had included courses on asymmetric warfare, chaos theory applications, and defense against non-standard threats. These subjects had been considered too specialized for most alien officers who preferred to focus on conventional military science. 7 years had passed since humanity departed from galactic space, and the once mighty Council civilization was now nothing more than refugee fleets hiding in the dark spaces between star systems. The Devourers had consumed over 80% of inhabited worlds, leaving behind empty husks stripped of all technology and life. Speaker Zolthara commanded the last Free Council forces from a converted cargo vessel that had been hastily modified to serve as a mobile headquarters. The decision to contact humanity had not come easily. For months, the surviving council members had debated whether to swallow their pride and ask for help from the species they had exiled. Many still believed that admitting their mistake would be worse than facing extinction with dignity. But as more worlds fell and more refugees died in the cold void of space, even the most stubborn delegates began to accept that they had run out of alternatives. Communications specialist Lee Yun-jung had left behind detailed protocols for reaching human space in case of emergency. Her quantum beacon systems had been designed to penetrate the communication barriers that separated human territory from the rest of the galaxy. The technology was complex and required precise calibration, but it offered the only hope of contacting the departed humans before the Devourers consumed what remained of galactic civilization. The task of operating Lee Yun-jung's equipment fell to a mixed team of alien technicians who had worked with human engineers in the past. None of them fully understood the principles behind the quantum communication systems, but they had enough basic knowledge to attempt contact. It took them 3 weeks of careful work to activate the beacon network and establish a stable transmission channel. The message that the Council finally sent was simple and direct. Speaker Zolthara himself composed the text, choosing his words carefully to convey both the desperate nature of their situation and their willingness to accept responsibility for past mistakes. The transmission was broadcast on every frequency that humanity had ever used, repeated continuously for 72 hours to ensure that it would be received. The response came exactly 1 week later, appearing simultaneously on every communication device in the refugee fleet. The signal was so strong and clear that it seemed to come from nearby space, but long-range sensors showed no ships in the area. The humans had developed communication technology that was far more advanced than anything the Council had possessed. Admiral Bae Dong-wook's voice was calm and professional as it echoed through the refugee ships. His words carried the weight of 7 years of accumulated pain and the authority of someone who had been given the power to speak for all humanity. This is Admiral Bae Dong-wook of the Human Defense Force responding to the Council's emergency. Transmission. We have received your request for assistance and are prepared to discuss terms. The formal tone of the Admiral's response made it clear that this would not be a simple rescue operation. Humanity had changed during their years of exile, and they would not simply return to their old role as the galaxy's unpaid protectors. The relationship between humans and the rest of galactic civilization would have to be rebuilt from the ground up with new terms and new understandings. The negotiations were conducted through quantum communication channels that allowed real-time conversation across vast distances. Diplomat Im Yu-jin led the human delegation and made their position clear from the beginning. Humanity was willing to help fight the Devourers, but the cost would be measured in more than just material resources. The galaxy would have to acknowledge its mistakes and accept changes that would prevent such problems from happening again. The human terms were not unreasonable, but they were comprehensive and non-negotiable. Humanity would return to galactic space as an equal partner, not as a subordinate member seeking approval from alien authorities. Human military forces would have operational independence and the right to establish defensive positions wherever they deemed necessary. Human research and development would proceed without interference from Council oversight committees. Most importantly, humanity would never again be subject to the kind of prejudicial treatment that had led to their original exile. The new galactic constitution would include specific protections for species that were willing to take dangerous jobs and make difficult sacrifices for the common good. No species could be excluded from decision-making processes simply because others found their methods uncomfortable or unfamiliar. Speaker Zolthara accepted the human terms without hesitation. The surviving council members had learned through bitter experience that humanity's aggressive tendencies had actually been protective instincts directed at external threats. The military preparations that had made aliens nervous had been the only thing standing between galactic civilization and complete destruction. The human response was swift and overwhelming. Within days of the agreement being signed, massive fleets began emerging from jump points throughout the galaxy. The ships were clearly human in design, but incorporated technologies that the Council had never seen before. Humanity had not been idle during their 7 years of exile, and they had made remarkable advances in both military and civilian technology. Captain Ko Min-jung commanded one of the first human fleets to engage the Devourers directly. Her ships used tactics that seemed chaotic and unpredictable to alien observers, but which followed patterns based on chaos theory and adaptive response algorithms. Instead of trying to match the Devourers' logical approach to warfare, the humans introduced deliberate randomness into every aspect of their operations. The effectiveness of human tactics against the Devourers was immediately apparent, where alien fleets had been systematically destroyed by enemies who could predict and counter every move. Human forces achieved victories through pure unpredictability. Human ships would change course randomly, fire weapons at empty space, and break formation for no apparent reason. The Devourers could not adapt to tactics that had no underlying logic. Dr. Shinbo Ra's research had provided the theoretical foundation for the human weapons that proved most effective against silicon-based consumers. Her studies of chaotic system disruption had led to the development of quantum cascade weapons that could overload the neural matrices of technological organisms. These weapons created feedback loops that caused the devourers to consume themselves rather than their intended targets. The first major human victory came at the Battle of Kepler Station, where Commander Yang Subin's reconstructed early warning network detected a massive devourer concentration preparing to attack the refugee gathering point. Human forces arrived just hours before the enemy assault began and managed to turn what should have been a massacre into a devastating defeat for the invaders. The battle demonstrated not just the effectiveness of human military tactics, but also the importance of proper intelligence and preparation. Yang Subin's monitoring systems provided detailed information about devourer movement patterns and tactical preferences. This intelligence allowed human commanders to position their forces optimally and choose weapons that would be most effective against specific types of silicon-based organisms. General Song Woo-jin coordinated the liberation of occupied worlds, using combined human and alien forces that gradually pushed the devourers back toward the galactic rim. The alien troops learned to follow human tactical leadership, even when the orders seemed to make no sense. They discovered that human commanders had an intuitive understanding of battlefield chaos that allowed them to turn apparent disasters into unexpected victories. The liberation campaigns revealed the true scope of what the galaxy had lost when it exiled humanity. Every successful operation depended on human expertise in areas that other species had never fully understood. Human engineers could repair damaged infrastructure under combat conditions. Human logistics specialists could organize supply lines through hostile territory. Human intelligence analysts could predict enemy behavior patterns that seemed completely random to alien observers. Engineer Oh Da-yoon's teams worked around the clock to restore power and communications to liberated worlds. Her quantum resonance systems had been improved during humanity's exile and could now provide stable energy even in areas that had been damaged by devourer consumption. The crystal cities of the Morden began to shine again as human technicians brought their ancient power systems back online. The refugee relief operations managed by Captain Ryu Sun-hee demonstrated humanity's continued willingness to take risks for the sake of others. Her cargo fleets carried supplies through devourer-controlled space to reach isolated survivor communities that had been cut off for years. These rescue missions required navigating through hostile territory where a single mistake could result in the loss of entire ships and crews. Trade Administrator Nam Ho-seok established new supply chains that connected the scattered refugee communities with sources of food, medicine, and essential equipment. His distribution networks had to operate under constant threat of devourer attack, but they provided the foundation for rebuilding galactic civilization in the territories that human forces had liberated from enemy control. The turning point in the war came when Dr. Seo Young-mi's improved quantum communication systems allowed perfect coordination between human fleets operating across multiple star systems.